August 2022 in St. Petersburg, Russia, police broke down the door of an apartment belonging to one of Russia's most famous influencers, Anastasia Kamlovskaya. What they found inside would haunt them forever, a case that even veteran detectives admitted they had never seen anything so brutal. Anastasia Kamlovskaya was born in 1996 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her childhood was spent in a tiny room in the suburbs, where having her own bed was a luxury. For the first 12 years of her life, she had to share the only bed with her mother, Elena, simply because there was no other choice. Her father abandoned the family right after Anastasia was born, an alcoholic who never returned to visit his child or sent any money for support. Elena had to work 2 jobs, but no matter how hard she tried, it was barely enough to get by. In that cramped space, Anastasia grew up without knowing what privacy meant. She never had a small corner to retreat to, never had anything that was completely her own. Those years carved deep, unfading marks into her soul. Then came 2008. Anastasia was 12 years old. Her mother, Elena, decided to send her to live with her paternal grandmother in Kolpino, a small, unfamiliar town. For Anastasia, this was a crucial turning point. For the first time in her life, she had a bed that was hers alone, a room of her own, a space she could call mine. Elena initially promised she would visit her daughter on weekends, but those visits became increasingly infrequent. Elena's life had found a new man, a new beginning, and in that picture of happiness, Anastasia became a piece that didn't fit. The child support payments continued to arrive regularly, but mother-daughter affection? That had grown cold long ago. In loneliness and pain, Anastasia found an escape through painting. Her artwork was deeply melancholic, like the silent cry of a soul struggling to surface. Fortunately, her grandmother understood this. The elderly woman not only supported, but quietly nurtured her granddaughter's creative abilities. At age 15, Anastasia began talking about wanting tattoos and piercings. Instead of stopping her like most grandmothers would, her grandmother simply asked, "Would it make you happy?" When she heard the answer was yes from her granddaughter, she not only provided the money, but personally took her to the tattoo parlor. From that moment, Anastasia felt liberated. She began designing her own tattoos, immersing herself in the world of K-pop and anime. Comic conventions, cosplay competitions, gradually she became the standout girl everyone noticed, some admiring, others envious. While still sitting in school, Anastasia bought her first tattoo machine. She started tattooing herself, then her friends. This wasn't typical teenage behavior. This was raw, artistic talent combined with a burning desire for self-expression. At 16, when Anastasia created her social media account, something magical happened. Her vibrant personality, artistic talent, and unique style quickly attracted attention. She wasn't just a pretty face. She was a storyteller, sharing thoughts, passions, and dreams in ways that made thousands of people feel understood. Anime fans, body art enthusiasts, the cosplay community, all found something familiar in her journey and passions. Without knowing it, Anastasia had transcended being an ordinary social media user. She had become an influencer with a powerful voice and a loyal fan base. By age 19, this rising internet star had saved enough money to return to St. Petersburg, rent her own apartment, and work at a prestigious tattoo studio under the artistic name Grishman. She began drawing up bigger plans like appearing on television, collaborating with major brands, and everything a star could dream of. While Anastasia was building her reputation in St. Petersburg, in another city, a young man was struggling with his own issues, Dimmitri Chernyshov, born February 15, 1998, in Omsk. His childhood began with loss when his mother died while he was young, leaving only faint memories and a father who hastily remarried. The stepmother treated Dimmitri as if he were an obstacle, cold, distant, as if wanting to erase his existence. Lacking love and affection, Dimmitri grew up to become a withdrawn, shy, and quiet boy. Like many others, he found an escape through art, first drawing, then poetry. But what was concerning was how he expressed himself on social media. Dimitri's posts became increasingly strange. He openly wrote about wandering through cemeteries, gazing at portrait photos of young girls on tombstones, and imagining their short lives. Despite being in a serious relationship with his high school girlfriend, Margarita, he frequently shared detailed descriptions of his ideal partner, not just personality traits, but specific physical features and age. In 2017, Dimmitri decided to move to St. Petersburg. Margarita, his devoted girlfriend, was the one who arranged everything. She bought tickets, found housing, and organized their new life together. She trusted him completely and was ready to support all his decisions without question. To make ends meet, they began taking web design orders. But then one day, Dimmitri came up with another idea: producing adult content. He pulled Margarita into the project, taking on the role of producer and actor, while she became his on-camera partner. The work brought in decent income, but there was one notable detail. Dimmitri kept almost all the money for himself. By 2020, he had bought a Mercedes-Benz, which he didn't hesitate to show off on social media. Meanwhile, Margarita seemed unbothered by being financially controlled. She still trusted him completely, letting him lead everything. A textbook example of classic manipulation. Then fate intervened in the most ironic and cruel way. During a visit to Anastasia's studio for a tattoo, Margarita was immediately captivated by the young artist's technique and unique style. So when Dimmitri expressed wanting a new tattoo, Margarita didn't hesitate to recommend Anastasia, whom she called one of the most skilled in the industry. From their first meeting, a spark ignited between Dimmitri and Anastasia that was hard to hide. As the needle began moving across his skin, both quickly realized they had too much in common: difficult childhoods, restless artistic souls, passion for tattoos, anime, and cars. But above all, they shared a fierce desire to achieve fame at any cost. Professional work sessions quickly turned into intimate conversations, then into dates at car shows and anime conventions, places where they could be themselves away from prying eyes. Before long, they fell into a passionate affair, full of intensity, but also full of risk. They tried to hide everything. But when you're involved in a 5-year relationship with a woman who trusts you blindly, secrets sooner or later will be exposed. Margarita didn't take long to realize the truth laid bare before her eyes. The woman who had once trusted enough to introduce her boyfriend to Anastasia now could only helplessly watch her 5-year relationship crumble piece by piece. Initially, she tried to stay calm, to handle everything maturely, through conversations, discussions, efforts to salvage and find common ground. But Dimmitri's response was only evasive, vague, and insincere words. He promised to end things with Anastasia, then secretly continued the relationship behind Margarita's back, as if promises were just tools to delay everything. When conversations turned into confrontations, when trust was replaced by jealousy, when love had no place left, Dimmitri made his choice. And sadly, he didn't choose Margarita. What truly became the deepest knife to Margarita's heart was this. Dimmitri had bought Anastasia an expensive car, something he had never done for Margarita even once in their 5 years together. This was no longer simply an affair. This was an act of completely erasing everything they had built together, from feelings and trust to personal sacrifice. In a moment of complete collapse, Margarita allegedly damaged the car and even threatened to harm herself. But even that wasn't enough to make Dimmitri stay. She had left her hometown for him, entered a controversial industry under his influence, supported him financially, emotionally, and professionally. And this was what she received in return. Dimmitri left the apartment that had been their shared home with Margarita and moved in with Anastasia. By this time, Anastasia had become a prominent name on social media with hundreds of thousands of followers. And Dimmitri? He was about to get what he had pursued his entire life: fame. He became his new girlfriend's manager, responsible for building her media image, producing content, and even running the online courses that generated steady income. Their business exploded. Followers continued to grow. But for Dimmitri, it still wasn't enough. The ambition within him remained unsatisfied. It didn't take long for Dimmitri to convince Anastasia to become his partner in producing adult content. He painted a glittering picture of fame, money, and a special position in the online world. But remember, this wasn't new. He had done exactly the same with Margarita, the same promises, the same old manipulation tactics. Anastasia quickly agreed, and her career took a completely different path. Dimmitri called her his muse, gave her expensive gifts, appeared beside her as a loving and successful partner. But the reality was, Anastasia was the one who had to pay the price, with her image, reputation, and mental health. She was the spokesperson, the soul of the brand, the real asset. And Dimmitri? He just sat behind the scenes, counting profits. This change didn't happen in silence. In early 2022, Anastasia was invited to appear on the television talk show Beyond the Line to share about her life and career journey. She agreed, thinking it would be a positive promotional opportunity for herself. But she had no idea she was walking into a meticulously orchestrated psychological ambush. Right at the studio, the production team had invited her mother, Elena, to appear as a surprise. In the suffocating atmosphere of lights and millions of viewers watching through screens, Elena choked up, saying her daughter wasn't raised to become like this, then blamed Dimmitri directly for everything that had happened. The incident immediately became a media storm, and from there, the glamorous mask began to crack. When Anastasia stepped onto the stage, she immediately defended herself and the boyfriend who was being harshly criticized. Before millions of viewers watching the show, she declared that making adult films was her long-held dream, even calling it a form of modern art. She didn't hesitate to mock the moral preaching about living properly, considering it merely outdated stereotypes imposed on women. But then, the show dropped the real bomb. Margarita, the ex-girlfriend who had stood by Dimmitri for 5 years, suddenly appeared as a guest. With a calm but suppressed voice, she described Dimmitri as someone with tendencies to manipulate and attack both emotionally and physically with his partners. She didn't speak loudly, but every word was like a knife blade. Margarita implied that what Dimmitri truly cared about wasn't Anastasia, but the fame she could bring him. When the host turned to Elena, Anastasia's mother, and asked whether she was worried about her daughter living with someone who had been accused of abuse, Elena just shook her head slightly. She said softly, "Dimmitri seems very quiet. I don't think he's capable of harming anyone." That statement seemed harmless, but in this context, it would become a deadly denial. Just a few months after the talk show where Anastasia had fiercely defended Dimmitri, their relationship began to crack beyond repair. Dimmitri, who had now completely abandoned his work in the tech industry, gradually became dependent on Anastasia's income. He began pushing her to appear more frequently in pornographic content, no longer art, no longer choice, but financial obligation. Anastasia felt trapped. She not only wanted to end the relationship, but also wanted to leave the country to start over. After months of saving, she seriously planned to emigrate to South Korea, where she dreamed of opening a tattoo studio, free and independent. She shared this plan with some close friends, began gradually selling her belongings, and cleaning up her old life as if removing each layer of chains. At the end of July 2022, Anastasia finally convinced Dimmitri to leave her apartment. Those close to her believed she was so determined because someone new had entered her life. A blogger, a famous influencer named Kirill Kittleson. On July 31st, Anastasia met Kirill. They spent an afternoon walking through the familiar streets of St. Petersburg, talking about everything, laughing freely. For the first time in months, Anastasia's eyes sparkled with genuine happiness. Not the fake happiness of social media, but radiance from deep within her soul. Relief. Freedom. Something in her eyes resembled someone who had just seen herself again. But just hours after parting ways, Kirill received a cold and unexpected message. Anastasia said it would be the last time they met, and she didn't want to continue any contact. Kirill was stunned. He immediately called, once, twice, then continuously in desperation. But there was only the sound of ringing in the void. No one answering. The gentle and warm woman who had just smiled brightly beside him now seemed to have vanished into thin air. Something had happened, and the change was so sudden it was terrifying. From that fateful night, a completely different Anastasia appeared, or more accurately, disappeared from the real world. She cut all ties with normal life, refusing to meet friends, avoiding scheduled appointments, and never answering when anyone called. Instead, she only replied through messages with short, cold responses like, "Ice, I need quiet," or "I need time to process everything." Although she continued posting on social media, sometimes sharing quiet status updates about her personal journey, she no longer live-streamed, no longer appeared with her real face. Her mother and closest friends were the first to sense something was wrong. They knew Anastasia too well. She was someone who could never stay silent for so long, never refuse calls from loved ones. Essentially, Anastasia had completely disappeared from the real world, leaving only a digital ghost that continued operating mechanically. On August 2nd, fate arranged a chance encounter that would reveal the truth. A close friend of Anastasia was attending a friend gathering when she suddenly saw Dimmitri there. Worried about Anastasia, she decided to ask about her. His response left her horrified. "My former partner asked me to help her go far away," Dimmitri said with a terrifyingly casual tone. "And I did as she asked." It wasn't the words, but the way he said them. Cold, comfortable, as if discussing weekend plans. In his eyes, there was no sadness, no worry, only a strange satisfaction, as if he had just completed a difficult task. When she tried to ask more, he refused to elaborate, but that friend knew something terrible had happened. The next 7 days were 7 days of hell for that friend. She knew something was wrong, but how could she prove it? Anastasia was still texting, still posting, family was still receiving messages from her, but all interactions felt mechanical, missing the warmth, missing the soul that Anastasia once had. Finally, unable to bear this uncertainty any longer, on August 9th, she called the police and told them everything she knew. Police arrived at Anastasia's apartment that same afternoon. They knocked, but no one answered. They called out, only echoes from the empty hallway. A terrifying feeling enveloped the space as they realized the frightening silence. Finally, with no other choice, they broke down the door and entered. The room was like the scene of a shattered dream. Half-packed suitcases lay scattered across the floor. Airline tickets to South Korea were still on the table, next to a passport and documents for a new life. The bed was soaked with dark stains that had dried and hardened, telling the story of final moments filled with horror. And in the bathroom, they found Anastasia's body. She lay there with her entire future ahead of her. But now she was just a cold corpse, having begun to decompose after more than a week. The autopsy report later confirmed Anastasia had died from multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. Deep, brutal wounds that showed someone didn't just want to kill her, but wanted her to endure ultimate pain before dying. The crime scene told the story of a dream about to become reality that was suddenly cut short. Anastasia was in the process of packing for her journey to Seoul, suitcases opened wide with carefully arranged clothes, meticulously prepared immigration documents, even business plans for her dream tattoo studio. Everything pointed to a woman who was ready to start a new chapter of her life, escaping the toxic relationship that had suffocated her for too long. Freedom was right before her eyes, just a few more days away. After discovering Anastasia was dead, Dimmitri immediately became the prime suspect and was arrested the next day. From the first minute in the interrogation room, he began a sophisticated and terrifying web of lies. His story? A confused mess of self-defense, accident, mercy killing, and assisted suicide, each version contradicting the previous one, each retelling revealing more clearly the deceitful nature of the entire story. According to Dimitri's initial statement, after Anastasia's date with Kirill on the night of July 31st, she came home and he appeared shortly after. When he saw the half-packed suitcases, when he saw the airline tickets and immigration documents prepared and ready, he realized she truly intended to leave him and start a new life. Perhaps she had told him about Kirill, about the new love she had found. about the final hope to escape his control. According to him, they had a fierce argument. She told him she had had enough, that she wanted freedom, that she would never return to him. And in blind rage, at least that's what he claimed, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed Anastasia repeatedly. Then he said he ran away in shock, panicked, then came back to save Anastasia, but discovered she was already dead. So he decided to move her body to the bathtub and leave it there. But this was just the beginning of his cruel cover-up plan. While Anastasia's body lay in the bathroom, Dimmitri completely took over her social media life, responding to messages from family and friends, posting on social media, maintaining the perfect illusion that she was still alive and preparing for her trip to South Korea. However, when lawyers advised and helped Dimmitri build his legal strategy, his story changed completely once again. This time in a more calculated and frightening direction. He completely abandoned his previous statements about self-defense or accident, instead transforming himself into a reluctant hero. According to this new version, Anastasia had fallen into severe depression, so desperate that she begged him to free her from the pain. He claimed he was only fulfilling his lover's final request, an act born of compassion, not cruelty. But truth has a way of exposing even the most sophisticated lies. During the crime scene reconstruction, when investigators asked Dimmitri to describe the final moments in detail, he accidentally let slip a detail that completely destroyed his entire story. When asked about Anastasia's final words, he admitted, with a confused look when he realized his mistake, that she had begged him to call for help. If someone wanted to die, why would they beg to be saved? This confession was like a bomb, completely exposing the deceitful nature of all previous stories and proving that Anastasia had fought for her life until the very last moment. But what Dimmitri did after murdering Anastasia truly revealed his frightening cruelty and calculation. Throughout the following months, he turned hiding his crime into a dark art. He regularly returned to the apartment, not out of guilt or remorse, but to maintain a perfect performance. He taped over every crack and air vent to prevent the smell of decomposition from spreading to the hallway, sprayed perfume on Anastasia's body to mask the increasingly heavy stench of decay. This wasn't the behavior of someone being tormented by guilt. These were the cold, calculated actions of someone who only cared about protecting himself. Meanwhile, he had completely taken over Anastasia's social media life with frightening accuracy. He used her phone to respond to messages from family and friends, posted old photos from her gallery with captions that perfectly matched her style, even used her bank cards to pay rent and make daily purchases. For months, he maintained the perfect illusion that Anastasia was still living a normal life. On January 22, 2023, Dimmitri finally pleaded guilty to murder, but still clung to his fabricated story about Anastasia begging to be freed. Judges, lawyers, and the victim's family all had to witness him transform brutal murder into a story about compassion and love. The trial dragged on with contradictory testimonies and final attempts to escape consequences. By January 2024, the final verdict was announced: 8 years in prison. Only 8 years for planning and executing murder. 8 years for manipulating her family and friends for months. 8 years for stealing not just her life, but her final chance at happiness and freedom when Seoul was right before her eyes. But Anastasia's pain didn't end with death. In one final heartbreaking detail, her mother Elena allowed media film crews to film at her daughter's funeral, for a fee. Even in death, Anastasia was still turned into a source of income, still exploited by the very person who should have protected her most. Her paternal grandmother, who had truly loved and nurtured Anastasia since she was 12 years old, publicly and harshly criticized Elena. She couldn't understand how a mother could turn her child's funeral into a business opportunity. Even after death, Anastasia couldn't escape being exploited. What do you think about this case? Is the 8-year sentence enough for the killer to pay for the crime he committed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.